Baseball Podcast. I'm Justin Mason, lead fantasy writer and analyst at friendsoffantasybenefits.com. Joining me on this episode is the one, the only Peter Pratt of the Locked On Marlins podcast. Peter, my friend, how you doing?
Mace, I'm doing great. That intro, you have got that nailed. And that could be a tongue twister for many, but that intro is absolutely phenomenal, my man. So kudos to you. I'm doing well. How are you getting on?
I'm doing all right. I've had a lot of practice this month.
You have.
I have said that over and over and over again. And only messed it up a couple times. So that's good.
Yeah. Nice. Nice.
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's Friday night. Nighttime for my time anyway. We're hitting the button here, 9 p.m. So I think the kids are still awake, but I've told them Dad's got a work call. That's what I've said. So, all's good. I've got the no alcohol Guinness. So that's something new. I'm a big Guinness fan anyway. Dry Jan. I know you don't drink either. But Dry Jan, I thought 0% Guinness. This could go one of two ways. And I must say, it went the right way. Really good, really impressive. So I'm absolutely guzzling 0% Guinnesses here, waiting for February to come around and get the wine going again.
Well, I'm going to have to go check out a 0% Guinness. That sounds amazing. Yeah. Remind everybody where you can reach on social media and then talk about all your work.
Absolutely. Social media-wise, I'm a Twitter guy only. At Miami Marlins _UK. No TikToks, no Instas. I am too old. I've said that many times. Too old for those platforms. So Twitter only. And as you already mentioned, primarily podcasting daily about the Marlins, would you believe, over at Locked On and Locked On Marlins. So I've been doing that for just over a year now. There are rumors. There's talk. We'll see. But the Roto Brits podcast may also be refired. So we'll wait and see if that happens. As you know, it can be challenging to kind of keep pumping out multiple pods with the family situation. But we will see. The Roto Brits was people liked it, and it's always great around draft season. So we may get that going. That's myself and Ryan Owen, who is the brains, and I'm the host on that one.
And that's a fantastic fantasy podcast. So I'm really hoping you guys get that going again. Definitely go follow Peter on that Twitter machine. Let's talk about these Miami Marlins. We'll start with the catching situation where there's Jacob Stallings and Nick Fortes. Do we care about either of these guys?
Oh, Mace, this is an interesting question, right? Because in theory, no. In theory, we should say, let's move on to the next position. But if we keep doing that for the Marlins offense, we will be into the pitching in 4 minutes, probably, and maybe less. Let's talk about the catching situation. Jacob Stallings, a man, for the catchers, let's talk about splits. That's what I'd say. Jacob Stallings' first half, absolutely terrible. He was absolutely terrible, apart from hitting a home run on opening day in his debut for the Marlins. But second half, nice. Came around. He was serviceable, I would describe, in the second half. Nick Fortes. When he's catching and hitting, a stud. There's definitely something there. There's some power there in Nick Fortes' stick, no doubt. However, when he was DHing, in which the Marlins needed him to DH a little bit last year because we had no one else, Nick Fortes was probably the worst hitter ever in baseball. He was absolutely turgid. Let me just dig this out here. I was looking earlier. It shocked me. He was hitting 0.26 as the DH. That means one hit in 46 plate appearances for Nick Fortes in the DH. When he was actually catching, he was hitting 276. So there's something there with Nick Fortes. The question is playing time. Stallings is going to be catching for Sandy. He'll probably be catching for Luzardo or Trevor. So probably Cueto maybe actually as well. So it's going to be 60-40, I think, to Stallings. The bat is not exciting. If Fortes gets more playing time, if Stallings goes down, I think he's a real little sleeper pick there on a catching front where clearly it's thin, right? But I like the profile of Nick Fortes, but not sure there's enough playing time. We'll wait and see. And hopefully he never DHs ever again.
Yeah, hopefully now with Soler back, they won't need him to DH anymore. I do like Fortes kind of as a low-end C2. If you're going to wait on your second catcher in like a 15-team league, I did this in a draft. I mean, right now, I took JT Realmuto as my number one catcher, and I went, hey, I got the best catcher in the game. I'm going to wait a while for my second catcher, and I grabbed Nick Fortes super late. So Like, I don't have a problem with that kind of, and if he doesn't work out, you kind of rotate him off your roster for the next guy. Stallings is a defense first guy, doesn't really have fantasy value outside of NL only. What about Garrett Cooper? Been seeing some interesting videos of him in the batting cage, looking pretty swole right now. You interested in Garrett Cooper this year?
He's looking like a sex god, isn't he? Cooper Loop in the batting cage. He's looking nice. Cooper Loop, good question. Here's the first thing I'll say about Coop. Let's not forget, he was an all-star in 2022. He made the all-star team. So Coop he's got potential. He's got ability. He also, he has a tendency to get hurt in every way possible. And so that is the problem with Coop. The power took a dip as well last year. So it definitely, the power was sapped. Everyone's power was sapped last year in Lone Depot, to be honest with you. But power was down. Became more of a contact hitter, actually. Was hitting, first half in particular when he got voted in at the All-Star, into the All-Star game, was hitting kind of 280, 290. Yeah, power was gone. Not many RBIs because obviously the offense was turgid. But Coop, I think is, if this offense is better this year, there's a chance for a little bit more counting stat action. They have no depth at first base unless Arias slides over and plays some first base. But really, what we're hearing is Coop's the first baseman. They have no one else to play it. Arias is going to play second base. Plenty of bats and plate appearances here for Coop. He's serviceable at first base, but he's not that sexy. The power stroke isn't there, and it's kind of what you're looking for in the corner infield guy. So, he's okay. Let's describe it at that.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, and clearly they were, flirting with the idea of signing Yuli Gurriel. So, they could easily bring in a Yuli Gurriel type bat to share time with him. And then he's really useless if he's only in some sort of platoon kind of situation. So,
yeah, definitely.
Speaking of Luis Ariz, that was an interesting trade. They get, now an everyday, probably second baseman, though he can play all around the infield. Won a batting title last year. Are you interested in Luis Ariz for fantasy?
You have to be. I mean, if you like a kind of DJ LeMahieu kind of vibe or something in those kind of realms with he hit over, I don't know, hit 320 last year, and he's going into Lone Depot. It's massive in Lone Depot, so he's going to probably have an uptick there, bit more. I guess doubles and triples or whatever from him. Maybe not. I suppose it is relevant for fantasy, but Arias, I like the trade. I like the bat. The Marlins have gone in a bit of a different direction here. They're moving away from the power bats, which is where they loaded up last year, and it didn't work. So they're going for more contact-orientated guys. Sad to lose Pablo Lopez. I'm just talking about the trade itself. Like Pablo, absolute stud, top dude. Was what it was. We've got too many arms, and we needed some sticks. And so Arias, the batting champ. Go and get the batting champ. And 3 years of control. Fits the profile for the Marlins too. I mean, I like Arias. I'm interested to see where he plays. I mean, Kim Ang's come out and said he's going to be playing second base. No shift. Second base, he's limited there. Dodgy knees. I mean, we'll wait and see how that works. But this is all connected, right? Arias into second base. Miguel Rojas traded. Joey Wendell's going into shortstop by all accounts. And Jazz Chisholm's going out to center field. Gene Segura's been signed and he's playing third base. I don't know what the Marlins are doing positionally, but it's going to be interesting. They've for a team that's pitching and defense, boy oh boy, they are really testing this defense in the infield. I think this year.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned, and I do kind of wonder how this is all going to kind of shake out, and if the move for Jazz to center field actually even happens. Considering I think they just are a better team up the middle with him playing up the middle. Let's talk about Chisholm. It's, he's such a hard guy to rank or do projections on because it all comes down to health with him, right? When on a per plate appearance basis, if this was MLB The Show and we could turn off injuries, you'd be like, oh, he is a top, 25 talent in baseball or fantasy baseball, but he just hasn't been able to stay on the field. Are you taking the gamble on him this year in fantasy?
As a Marlins fan, I'll always take the gamble on Jazz, no doubt. So we've called it out. We all know the problem, right? It's just the health situation. And in reality, moving out to center field is, I think, increasing the risk of that, to be honest with you. Throwing himself around in a new position in an outfield where there's walls. And we've seen We've seen ACLs going left, right, and center. It's a dangerous spot. Jazz is going to throw himself into it. By all accounts, I'm still not convinced that he plays at all in center field. I wouldn't shock me if they end up making a different move or an additional move and go and get a center fielder, a legit center fielder. We were talking before we hit record here about Ramon Laureano on a different topic, but for example, that kind of guy where you think just go and get a guy to go and glove first guy that has some power upside in Laureano, and get Jazz back in the infield, protect him, and just let the stick play. Because if you've got to go out and try and learn center field, that's going to be wearing you down on the body. It's going to be wearing you down in the mind. And eventually it's probably going to wear you down where you start missing time, probably. But yeah, for Jazz, absolutely love him. What I would say, and this is where Arias and that move I think is interesting, where Arias is going to be leading off, I think, for the Fish then this year. That seems to be what we're hearing. Last year, Jazz spent a ton of time leading off. He isn't a leadoff hitter, Jazz Chisholm. And what we're likely to see when he's on the field is probably sliding down the order, potentially into the 3-hole, 4, 5, I don't know, somewhere in that kind of range. And so for me, I think that really fits Jazz's profile, actually. And if he is healthy and you get the power that we expect out of Jazz, I think maybe the speed will be cut a little bit. So I'd be careful on the stolen base situation. He's got 40 stolen bags in the locker if he wants to go, but I sense that maybe they'll calm that down a bit. But I think for Jazz, hitting in the heart of the order perhaps, could be really interesting there for him. Plays to his strengths. And as well, when I was looking with runners on and runners in scoring position, Jazz Chisholm last year, his numbers were insane. So you get some traffic in front of Jazz, he comes alive. When it was bases empty and he was leading off, nowhere near as good. And as well, lefties is a problem. So he may be platooned as well out of the lefty start. So long-winded answer of saying I absolutely love Jazz. Health is a problem. There's some other flaws in there too. Is the ADP too high? I think is probably the question. And probably it slightly is, unless you really want to gamble. But at that range, do you really want to gamble? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I'm in like a shallow league where there's replacement value on the waiver wire. I think I can make that gamble, right? You're bet on upside. But in your kind of standard 12-team leagues or deeper than that, like I just think it's too big of a cost considering he just has had such a hard time staying on the field.
Agreed. It's painful to say, but I agree.
I love Gene Segura, and I thought it was a really nice signing for you guys. I wonder, though, does the power kind of get sapped in Miami for him, and is he worth drafting in fantasy?
The power will be sapped in Miami. Let's just call that out right now. So, whatever he'd had before in Philadelphia, knock it down X%. I mean, what we see traditionally and what we've seen last year with, Avisail Garcia, Jorge Soler coming in, even Joey Wendell to an extent. These guys, their first year in Lone Depot, the power just disappears. It just disappears. So, yeah, that's the problem now for Gene. He ends up like a late 200s pick, somewhere in that kind of range. Power's going to dip, playing third base, okay, it's serviceable, but really this is kind of like you're getting into the latter rounds and you're just adding some depth here. We'll wait and see what Gene can do. I think he's going to end up being a better baseball player than a fantasy player, to be honest with you, in 23.
Yeah, I completely agree. Joey Wendell, I guess they're going to try to play him at shortstop full time. Seems kind of iffy to me. Do we care about him in fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's going to be playing shortstop. It sounds iffy to me as well. So we'll see. Everything about this Marlins infield is iffy. That is the perfect word. Joey Wendell started really well last year for the Marlins. Really, the first 2 months was great. Looked at really just a really good hitter, to be honest with you. And the hamstring issues, they were recurring for him. And once he got the hamstring problems, it was just so up and down with Wendell. What I would say as well, expiring deal with Wendell. And the same with Garrett Cooper. I should have mentioned that earlier too. What that means is, if you're a Marlins fan and you're a Marlins team that is in a really tough division and they may be out of it, there's a chance that Wendell, Cooper could be traded, halfway through the year. And so you may not be buying Joey Wendell or Garrett Cooper as Marlins players for the whole of the year. And so actually that may be a hidden value there in some of them if they end up getting traded to better ballpark situations, which, well, they can't be any worse, I guess. So, but Wendell, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, the power was sapped. There wasn't much speed, the hamstring issues. I'm not sure there's much value there either right now, other than, again, kind of maybe similar to Gene Segura, like bench guys that may end up being like functional players. I think they may platoon him as well. I think they may sit him against lefties. We'll wait and see on that. But to be honest with you, we're not clear. Everything is smoke and mirrors, I think, with the Marlins. Is Jazz playing center field? Is Gene Segura playing third? It wouldn't shock me if Arias ends up at first base. Cooper's traded. Jazz is back at second base. Gene Segura, I don't know. Maybe Jazz is at shortstop. Anything's possible here, Mace, to be honest with you, because at the moment it's square peg and round hole for pretty much every position, which sounds a bit of a wild strategy for Kim Ang, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it is an interesting strategy to say the least.
It really is.
Last year, John Birdie won people fantasy leagues, including the main event league I was in. Scott Jenstad won the league just because he picked up John Birdie for $12 in Fab one May, and then he just took off and stole him out like 28 bases or something insane. Are you drafting him this year at the increased price, though?
I would be very careful, very, very careful with the increased price tag for John Birdie. I mean, 41 stolen bags. There's a lot of bags. And so a lot of people will look at that number and go, give me some of that. And clearly, if steals are important in the league, then absolutely the value be up there. Right now, I just can't see the amount of playing time right now for John Birdie. That's the problem. That's the question, is what is the playing time situation? The Marlins have gone out and signed or traded for Arias and signed Segura, both in effect in Birdie's spot, right? Like they're blocked, and Birdie's blocked by those guys. Birdie came alive once Jazz Chisholm went down, effectively. That was the moment. Once Jazz was down and out from back end of June, Birdie got the playing time and never looked back and was just on a tear on the base path. So it's going to need an injury. It's going to need someone to go down. But Birdie, he has multiple years of control. The Marlins won't be trading him in all likelihoods. If there is an injury, then Birdie will get the time. He'll give you the steals. I don't think he's going to be starting, though. And so I would draft accordingly and be wary, perhaps, of going crazy on that, searching steals when you end up with a guy who, plays every 7 games or something like that. And then you end up with a 15 steal guy, perhaps.
Yeah. Let's move on to the outfield, talk about Jorge Soler and Avisail Garcia. Both had disappointing years last year. Do you think either or both potentially bounce back?
Oh, man. As a Marlins fan, okay, let's talk about Soler first. Soler is what he is in many ways. And actually, he was what he was projected to be in 2022. Just got hurt and had back problems. And so Soler is what he is. And if you want a guy to hit over 30 home runs, then I think he's still that guy. And, the plate discipline is questionable at times, but does walk a bit as well for the type of profile that he has. So Soler is what he is. Avisail Garcia. Now, this is a different question where I don't know what happened with Avisail Garcia last year, to be honest with you. He came in, signed the big deal. He came in heavy, and he just never looked interested and never got going in the year. He's now looking slim. He's looking ready. And when you go and look at his numbers in odd calendar years, i.e. 2023 or 2021 or 2019, he's a monster in odd years. So that is the only encouragement we have as Marlins fans when we load up all of our payroll into Soler and Avi Garcia. We're looking for things like this, where it's an odd year. That means Avisail Garcia is going to hit. At the moment, he's going to be playing every day in right field. I do believe that there could be a chance where, if things go poorly, that Avisail Garcia is benched. If he has a similar kind of 2023 to 2022, then Avi's going to be riding the bench, because the Marlins have got some other outfield candidates there that they're going to give some time to. And the one other thing I should have said, Mace, right at the top here, we shouldn't forget, Skip Schumacher's now the manager, not Don Mattingly. And everything we think we know about guys based on history, we may not know, because Skip, his staff, his style of baseball could be wildly different to Don Mattingly's style. And the same would be true for the pitchers we'll get into a bit later on. But Yeah, Avisail Garcia, I think we hope for a bounce back. It can't be any worse. So there's definitely, some deep value perhaps there, but boy, oh boy, striking out like over 30%, didn't walk. It was a disgraceful year from Avisail Garcia. That's the only way of describing it. And if Jazz Chisholm sticks to center field and if he plays there, Avi's on a short leash, I think, where they, if it's terrible, they'll flex away, give more playing time to De La Cruz or Jesus Sanchez. We'll probably talk about them shortly. But yeah, I don't really, buyer beware is how I would describe Avisail Garcia. Really is.
I'm so intrigued though, because when he is doing well and in shape, in which he looks like he's in shape right now, I hate to buy into the best shape of his life kind of mantras, but he looks like he is in pretty good shape right now. And when he is in good shape and really, he's a very, viable fantasy asset. I think people forget like just how good of a prospect he really was coming up. And while he never lived up to that hype, I think he could be a pretty useful fantasy price at a reduced piece at a reduced price this year.
Agreed. It's probably worth the risk late. I mean, I don't know. He's probably going like around 300, 350. I don't know, in that kind of range. So it's probably a late-ish flyer with some upside. And, it can't be any worse than 22. He is looking in great shape. He's going to be starting every day. He's going to be hitting in the heart of the order. In front of him is going to be, if everyone's healthy, like Arias, Jazz, Coop. There's going to be guys on base there in advance of Avisail Garcia. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to have every chance to succeed. And when he doesn't, it'll be the bench.
There you go. Let's talk about Brian De La Cruz and Jesus Sanchez. One of these guys has got to start in this outfield, I would assume. Right now, Brian De La Cruz is the one getting kind of all the love in terms of the ADP. I really like some of the changes that Jesus Sanchez made in the minors last year, though. Which guy are you preferring, or do you like both?
I like both, which is kind of the point I was making about Avi, where, if Jazz is in center field, I've got no problem with De La Cruz and Jesus Sanchez either side. De La Cruz's second half, particularly, he went down to AAA, as did Jesus Sanchez, so the two of them went down together, and De La Cruz came back up and was just straight up one of the best hitters in baseball for the last 6 weeks of the year. He was an absolute stud. So De La Cruz has got it in the locker. Jesus Sanchez is what he is, in that there's a strikeout there, there's power there, and if he can just minimize the strikeout and just get himself under control a little bit more, then there's a very intriguing profile. Let's not forget last season going into the year, like the helium was with Jesus Sanchez, because we've all seen that power profile. It's very intriguing as a profile, but there was a moment last year where the hole in his swing was uncovered, and it was top of the zone, and that was it. As soon as the league realized that was the end for Jesus Sanchez, and it was just strikeout after strikeout. So it's all about the adjustments for him. What adjustments can he make? The power's there. It's just, can you get your swing shortened? Can you get the contact going? And if so, very intriguing profile. Very, very intriguing. De La Cruz, I think, Jesus Sanchez could have a monster year. Like, he could absolutely just come and hit 35 bombs for the Marlins, I think. I don't think De La Cruz has quite got that in the locker, but not a million miles off. But I think he's overall a better hitter. Skip Schumacher, on one of his early interviews, was saying that De La Cruz is likely to get 500 at-bats in 23. So right now we're expecting De La Cruz to get the playing time in left field. But Jesus Sanchez is great against righties. Jesus Sanchez had absolutely never hit against a lefty ever again. But against those righties, the power plays. So intriguing profiles. Again, this all hinges on where does Jazz Chisholm play, to be honest with you. And if Jazz does play every day in center field, then the opportunity starts to shrink for these guys. I wouldn't sleep on either of them. Both of them, I think, have upside that is intriguing. Depends what you're looking for. Jesus Sanchez, clearly a power threat deep there in drafts. So could be interesting. All comes down to the playing time.
I'm with you there. Let's move on to those really interesting starting pitching, because I mean, even with the Pablo Lopez trade, the pitching staff is still just loaded with talent. Let's start with Sandy Alcantara, who has really just turned himself into a workhorse of an ace. Is he a top 5 starting pitcher in fantasy, though?
I mean, it's clustered at the top, right? Clearly, but with Sandy, the thing with Sandy you get, which is undeniable, is length.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've said many times, and I've heard many people say, they pay for length. And with that being said, I absolutely love Sandy. He's still in his prime. Like, he's actually coming into his prime. And I know Sandy, and I know what he's like mentally. He'll want to be better this year. He'll want to take it to the next level. That's just the way he operates, the way he is mentally. He'll be wanting to be even better. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued with Sandy. What I'd say is, for a guy that is an elite ground ball specialist, with the Marlins infield seemingly going significantly backwards defensively, I would say be careful about Sandy Alcantara in a fantasy perspective for 23. He relies heavily on the defense on purpose. And all of a sudden, if Miguel Rojas isn't there and Arias is looking shaky at second and there's no shifts, it could have quite a serious impact on a profile like Sandy's. So all I'd say is be careful. But for me, he's right up there still. And the length is unquestioned.
What about Jesus Luzardo? Because talent has never been the question for Luzardo. However, what has been questioned is the health and the length, right? Can he go more than like 140 innings at the major league level? Because he hasn't done it yet. Last year, 100 innings, or 100.1 innings pitched, highest of his career at the majors. Is this the year we finally see Luzardo pair the talent with the innings?
I really hope so. Last year, one major injury, a forearm strain, I think it was, expected to be 10 days, the minimum, or 15, whatever it is these days. It ended up being like 2 months, 2.5 months. What I would say from Luzardo, when he was pitching and on the mound, it was electric stuff. And the stock has risen there, where for me, they moved Pablo knowing that they have a number 2 in Jesus Luzardo. So it comes down to the health. I guess that can be said for many pitchers and many players we've already talked about today, actually. But, from what I've seen last year, legitimate number 2. And the strikeouts are there. Everything's there. He needs the innings. If the innings are there, there's 160 innings of Luzardo, there's over 200 strikeouts, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's a very intriguing profile. It really is. So yeah, if they can get him, keep him healthy, I think there's a nice upside there. Actually, he's probably going like late 100s, maybe 150. I don't know what the ADP is on him right now, but let's say 150, 160, 170. I think it's a really nice price there, actually, for Luzardo.
Yeah, Luzardo is one of those guys, man. Like I said about Jazz, if you could just turn off the injuries, you'd be like, hey, this is a top 30 starter potentially, especially because I don't know if it was just moving to Miami, or I think there was also some skills growth too. The command in the zone has gotten better, right? So he's not giving up the home runs, which was a problem for him in Oakland a little bit.
Yeah.
So his ADP currently is about 150. And the hard part for me is I don't know that I can project him for 140 innings. And if I can't project him for 140 innings, it's so hard for me to accumulate enough strikeouts and let those sparkling ratios, when they are sparkling, like really accumulate for my fantasy team. And so for that reason, I'm probably out on Luzardo this year. But like, I could easily just eat my words on that. Like, right? Like if he throws 150 or 160 of just, what he did last season, he's a top 25, top 30 starter.
He is. It's exactly that, Mace. It's just what it comes down to. Can you get 150, 160? If you do, you're seeing a profit. Or if you take him at 150 and you get 100 innings, then you're taking a loss. Yeah. It could go either way, to be honest with you.
And I think this is another example of like, hey, depends on your league context, right? If you're in a 15-team league, it's a really risky move to make because there won't be as much left on the waiver wire. But if you're in a 10-team league, do it. Go for that upside, right? Because if especially with how deep starting pitching is this year, like there'll be plenty to backfill him when he's missing starts or when he goes on the IL.
100%. exactly that.
Edward Cabrera is another really, really young, interesting arm that now with Pablo Lopez gone, he should have middle of rotation spot. Are you a buyer on Edward Cabrera?
Yeah, Eddie Cabrera is an interesting one. I absolutely love the profile, the tools, everything Eddie's got. To be honest with you, there's a Sandy Alcantara 2.0 in my opinion with Eddie Cabrera. It's clearly not as polished right now that Sandy is. I mean he's just won the Cy, and so you have to understand what we're comparing against. But the tools and the profile are so similar. With Eddie Cabrera, actually, he's got no minor league options, so he's going to be in the rotation. So we know that for certain, unless he's traded, and we shouldn't rule that possibility out either. If something appears for the Marlins, and what I mean by that is if Brian Reynolds appears for the Marlins, perhaps.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the type of guy that would really fit the Pirates, what they'd be looking for, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends if they value him high enough, I guess. But let's assume that he's going to be with the Marlins. For Eddie, the problem we've seen is just these niggling injuries, consistently these niggling injuries that he misses a bit of time here, a bit of time there. So that's the worry. It's health again, but when in his starts last year, he was absolutely phenomenal. I remember, I think his first start of the year, he went away. He was on the road in Coors, and you're thinking, boy, oh boy, here we go. Just what you need. Your first game, your first major league start of 22 on the road in Coors, just what you need. And he was absolutely stunning. So he's got the stuff. He's got the mentality. He's going to have the spot in the rotation. ADP-wise, if he's probably going, 200, 210, maybe even slightly later than that. It's an upside play again, Mace. Another upside play linked to the health. I like the profile. I think in a year's time, there's a shot that Eddie Cabrera is, being taken in the top 100, to be honest with you. I just think you've got a little bit of a discount now, but, I think 2023 could be a really interesting year for him. He may not be a Marlin, but it could be an interesting year.
I'm right there with you on Mr. Cabrera. A guy I was really big on last year who just utterly disappointed me was Trevor Rogers.
No, me too.
The combination of him and Lucas Giolito as my 1-2 in my main event allowed me to set my $1,700 on fire very, very quickly. I still can't quit him though. Like, I feel like a lot just went wrong in weird ways last season. And that I think that he has to be better, and that I think he can reclaim some of that glory we started to see in 2021. Are you with me on a bounce back for Trevor Rogers?
I am. I'm like you. I mean, I watched every Marlins game last year, and so I watched every Trevor Rogers start. And with that, as soon as the season started, it just didn't look the same. To my eyeballs, I was watching it saying, something looks off with Trevor. And it never really recovered. When you go back and watch the year before, he was just a big fastball guy. He had the fastball just absolutely moving. And then he was just working the changeup off that. And it was just unhittable, to be honest with you. It was absolutely fantastic in 2021. The fastball just didn't have the same zip. He's trying to mix in a slider. He was trying to work in. The slider wasn't good, and the changeup didn't play off the fastball. Something was off with Trevor last year. I could never put my finger on it. I personally think that knowing the Marlins and what they can do with pitchers, it wouldn't shock me if Trevor comes back and absolutely returns back to 2021 form. I'm like you. I'll be taking Trevor Rogers at a discount this year, in hope, probably like you, because I was burned last year on him as well, everywhere.
He's just so cheap in drafts this year.
He is cheap. Yeah. I just
cannot pass it up. He's currently going at pick 243 on NFBC. Like, sign me. I took him in the top 40 last year. Like, I'm getting a 200 pick discount a year later. I'm gonna take the gamble, because if he is just that, if he is what we saw in 2022, he'll be an easy drop for me. Whereas I held on to him most of the year last season after drafting him in the third round. So
he feels like the kind of guy that it may be 240 now, but by the time we really get into it, like, there'll be a bit of helium there, I think, with him. Like, I'd be shocked if he ends up going that low later in the draft season. I don't know, like, because your thought would be like mine and like many others going, he's worth a punt. And you take him and you end up kind of maybe even reaching a little bit earlier thinking, I'm happy to take him around 210, 220, just thinking, let's get him in. That's still a discount versus last year. So
especially if he does look good in spring training. If he looks good in spring training, then I think the price will definitely rise.
Oh, yeah.
Do we care about Johnny Cueto at all?
I don't think, I mean, from a Marlins perspective, I think he's necessary and will be useful in the rotation, but in the fantasy world, absolutely not. I mean, I'd say, he may give 160 innings and about 50 strikeouts in that time, and he'll be okay. We won't win many games, so I'd probably look elsewhere for rotation options than Johnny Cueto in Miami, to be honest with you. ERA should be okay, and WHIP, etc. But no Ks, no wins. I'd probably look elsewhere.
Yeah. All right. What about Braxton Garrett? Do you think he has a big role in this team?
Yeah, Braxy's an interesting one because he looks like the odd man out right now. The guys we've all met, and it comes down to if Trevor isn't fixed, then does Trevor start in AAA? Or if Trevor is fixed, then there's no spot in the rotation for Braxton Garrett. And so he will be in AAA. I think he does have minor league option the years remaining. So he was, to me, the biggest surprise last year. And that's saying a lot considering Jesus Luzardo was in the rotation as well. But Braxton was wonderful, to be honest with you. And it was just slider heavy. And curveball was nice too. But yeah, Brax, very impressive. Looks like the odd man out, though. Subject to trades. But for me, interesting guy. But I think you just need to give it more time to work out, is he in the rotation or not first? And I don't think his upside is really worth that kind of big punt in drafts right now. I think you just need to wait and see a little bit with Garrett and then, add him probably from the waiver wire as things happen, I guess. But yeah, it's going to come down to, do the Marlins move another arm? If they move Edward Cabrera and go and get Reynolds, then that changes things, I think, with Garrett.
All right. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Let's talk about the closing situation there in Miami. It was kind of a fluid situation, but Dylan Floro, the guy who I thought was going to start the role, finished with the role. Is he the guy this year, or is there someone else we should be targeting?
Everything suggests it's going to be Dylan Floro. And when you look at the numbers and what he's done, he's been fantastic. He's very, very good and very underrated, actually. It's one of the least sexy names knocking around, I think, in baseball, but Floro's numbers are wonderful. He was rushed back last year from injury, slow start, but once he regained the closer spot and was pitching late, the leverage innings, he was absolutely wonderful. And he's been wonderful in his time with the Marlins. So absolutely, I would say right now, he looks like the guy. I think he's also a free agent this year as well. So that's the other thing to call out. If the Marlins aren't in it in July, and you know what happens, Floro won't remain with the Marlins. So with that being said, you shouldn't fully rule out Tanner Scott either, who had the opportunity at time last year when Floro was missing. They started with Anthony Bender, if we think all the way back to the start of the year. When Tony Bender started, he's had Tommy John, so he won't be around this year. Tanner Scott, what an intriguing profile. And the stuff is absolutely there with Tanner Scott. Here's what I'd say on him. They acquired him really late from the Orioles in the year. It was pretty much like just before opening day. They realized they had no bullpen arms, so went and got Cole Sulser and Tanner Scott. One full offseason with the Marlins, with Mel Stottlemyre, it wouldn't shock me. And if you go and look at Luzardo's numbers the year before last, 160 whip, whatever, same kind of thing as what we've seen with Tanner Scott. It wouldn't shock me if all of a sudden Tanner Scott just gets the control down. The stuff is elite. It really is. And so there is an elite closer in there. There is an elite bullpen arm in Tanner Scott. Just needs to command the control. And I'm intrigued to see what there can be there. I think Floro will start in that role. It's possible he will be moved. And I'd say Tanner Scott has a really good opportunity at some point to get some serious save opportunities. Tongue in cheek there with the Marlins, because there won't be a ton of save opportunities probably once the year gets going.
Yeah, I'm actually right in lockstep with you. I think Floro is a really, really interesting kind of late closer right now. But if you're in a draft champions where you can't make pickups, you have to handcuff them with Tanner Scott. And I think even if you don't draft Dylan Floro, still take gambles on Tanner Scott, because like you said,
100%.
if the control becomes more manageable, he could turn into an absolutely elite closer, even on a team that's not going to win a lot of games in Miami.
100%. I think he had 20 saves last year. So he had 20 saves. He had a few blown saves. It is what it is.
When you're not a good team, sometimes your only wins are only by a few runs, so you get extra saves. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining me. This was an absolute pleasure.
Mace, absolutely loved it. Thanks for having me on. If there's a man to talk about the Marlins, I'm always there, ready to go for you, mate. And I think in summary, the pitching's nice. Plenty of guys to pick and plenty of upside knocking around in the pitching. I think from the offensive side, hinges around what you can get out of Jazz Chisholm Jr., right? And if you get a full year out of Jazz, not just for fantasy purposes, but just general for Major League Baseball, I think everyone is very excited to see what Jazz Chisholm Jr. can do over a full season, potentially in center field. He wants a Gold Glove. I mean, I wouldn't put it past Jazz Chisholm Jr. getting a Gold Glove in center field, to be honest with you.
I wouldn't either. Remind everybody where you can reach on social media, and then plug all your work again.
Absolutely. It's at Miami Marlins _UK. Don't forget the underscore. And the main podcast vibe is via the Locked On crew. So Locked On Marlins, daily pods, would you believe, talking about the Marlins. As you can tell, I love to talk about the Marlins. So get me over there. Maybe Roto Brits is back. TBC on that one, which is myself and Ryan Owens. So hopefully we can get that going, because Ryan is wonderful. And I just enjoy sitting back and listening to him.
Yeah, I do hope you guys get that going, but I will be Locked On Marlins with you listening right along. I don't know if I can keep up daily, but I will definitely be listening along. You can reach me on Twitter at Justin Mason FWFB. Email me the show, friendsoffantasybenefits@gmail.com. Rating daily at Fangraphs. I'm the Sleeper in the Bus podcast, doing these 30 team previews in 30 days. Only a couple more left, so I'll finally get to breathe for a little bit, and maybe even have some other couple things coming up out the woodwork here in the near future that we will announce. Keep giving us those 5-star reviews, and only a few more days to sign up for TGFBI. Sign up for TGFBI, because I'm going to start sending out all those TGI acceptance letters as of February 1st. So for Peter and myself, thank you for listening. Have a fantastic baseball offseason.